I am very thankful for the invitation and always grateful to Santa Monica Spiritual Assembly. They always have been very kind to me and frequently extending the invitation. Let me have a little water. To be able to discuss different issues, topics here. I also want to thank you, all of you, who have come on this Monday and in Los Angeles and the traffic and the like. Coming to here on Monday evening is a very difficult task. The topic that I chose for my discussions is Baha'u'llah and Peace. I chose this topic and the Spiritual Assembly agreed with me for the simple reason that we are still within 200 years from the birth of Baha'u'llah. Although this is now formally 2018, but until the November of 2018, we are in the time period which goes back to bicentennial celebration of his birthday. And the best way to celebrate Baha'u'llah and his birthday is to become familiar with his vision, with his ideas, with his works, with his books, and so on. And it was for that reason that I chose this topic. It was not a random topic. In discussing Baha'u'llah and Peace, I'm going to emphasize 4 different topics, and they would be all in the form of reconstructions. Reconstruction of the concept of victory, which I will discuss today, reconstruction of Persian poetic mysticism next time, reconstruction of interpretation or hermeneutics would be another topic, and finally reconstruction of temple. You'll see how these reconstructions would be related to the concept of peace, concept of religion, concept of social and political order, and the like. But the first topic, which is today, is regarding the reconstruction of the concept of victory. By the concept of victory, I mean the original word Nusrat, which is a Quranic term. And that means assisting, but at the same time it means rendering victorious. So the idea is that the cause of God, the will of God, the religion of God has to be made victorious, has to be assisted, has to be promoted. And in the writings of Baha'u'llah and in Baha'i faith, this concept of victory and how this victory is achieved and the method of this victory is reconstructed, reinterpreted, and that reconstruction, that reinterpretation really is the heart of the Baha'i faith. So everything that follows later is based upon that. So what I'm going to do today is first to say a few very introductory words about the concept of peace, the word that Baha'u'llah uses frequently for peace. And then, after that introduction, I'll address directly that concept of reconstruction of the idea of victory. But in the handout that I made a few copies, and I hope that you all have, and you can look at it. You see that at first it says peace as Islah. And then there are a number of statements of Baha'u'llah, which I have put the translation of these. All translations are by Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, so they are authorized, formal translation. And also I have inserted the original statement, which are all of them in Persian. So you have the translation and you have the original. After that, there is a statement of Baha'u'llah, reconstruction of the concept of victory, which we will discuss it later. But first, I want to talk about this word Islah, which Baha'u'llah uses it so frequently in varieties of his writings, and defines that as one of the two main purposes of his revelation. In his writings, he says that there was two reasons that he came and he wrote and he underwent all these sufferings and difficulties and so on. He says that the first reason was that he wanted to purify the world and the hearts of the people from all these lies that have taken the hearts of the people. So he has come to destroy the vain imaginings and varieties of lies that humanity has constructed. In the modern sociological, philosophical concepts, this is really the concept of social constructivism, namely that we human beings, we create all these ideas which are artificial and arbitrary, have nothing to do with reality, but then we become slaves of these concepts that we ourselves have fashioned, have created. So they become these ideals that we create, and then we sacrifice ourselves for the sake of these vain imaginings, these ideals that we have created. The second reason Baha'u'llah says for his revelation is to bring Islah to the world and to extinguish the fire of enmity and hatred from the world. Now, these two are very related to each other, these two purposes. In his writings, it's so interesting, so frequently. He frequently, for instance, he talks about the killing of the Bab, the prophet of the, one of the two prophets of the Baha'i faith, that in 1850 he was killed in a very mysterious, heroic, cosmic fashion, that event of martyrdom of the Bab in the city of Tabriz in Iran. This was 1850. But Baha'u'llah always, when he discusses this, he says that these bullets which killed the Bab, they are nothing but those vain imaginings, those lies that people throughout centuries have created, particularly the clerics. They have created, fabricated these lies. So they were a set of ideas. These ideas took a material form, and took the form of the bullets, and then killed the Bab. In other words, for the Bab, these material expressions of varieties of problems that we have, including all forms of violence that we have in the world, these are really expressions, embodiment, crystallizations of a set of ideas, a set of meaning systems. And in this case, a set of vain imagining, a set of lies. And so when Baha'u'llah says that I have come to this world for two purposes, one is to purify the world and hearts of the people from these lies, from these vain imaginings, the second part becomes the logical realization of the first part. Namely, he has come to extinguish the fire of hatred and enmity from the hearts of the people. So this concept of Islah, or in a sense peace, is the ultimate purpose of all the writings of Baha'u'llah and all the suffering that he went through. However, I'm not going to talk about Baha'u'llah's concept of peace. This gradually will take place in my 4 lectures. Today I just want to point out to the complexity of this particular word that Baha'u'llah uses, and the variety of interdependent meanings of this term. it may be useful to refer to an idea which in peace studies right now is very famous. It was an idea that one writer and peace activist in Scandinavian societies, he created. He's very famous in peace studies. His name is Galtung. And Galtung made a distinction between what he called positive peace and negative peace. And he said that negative peace is absence of war. So if there is cessation of hostilities, so there is no more war. Two countries are not killing each other. Then we have peace. This is negative peace. But then he talks about positive peace. Positive peace is not absence of war, but it is something real. It is something positive. In the first definition, namely negative peace, what is real, what exists is war. Now, non-existence of war becomes peace. Peace is a negative concept. If we eliminate the war, then we have peace. But what exists is war. In the second concept, namely in positive definition of peace, peace is what is real. And war becomes absence of peace. Now, in this definition of peace, in the positive sense of definition of peace, peace is not just non-existence of hostilities or non-existence of armed struggle. Two countries might be, or many countries of the world, may be apparently not engaged in military confrontations, but there is really a state of war. They hate each other, they are building armaments, they are preparing themselves in terms of varieties of political and military alliances and so on. Their purpose is to dominate. So this is real war, but the war is manifesting itself in a different form. So what is peace? That real peace, that positive peace, whose absence becomes war, even if there is not, manifest conflicts and so on, you can still have war. That positive peace is a form of relationship. When you have harmony and interdependence, mutual understanding and communication, which is nurturing both sides, then that state of affair is peace. Non-existence of that pattern of communication, of interaction, of harmonious relations, of mutual development is war, which sometimes takes the form of armed struggle and things like that. So in peace studies, we have moved away from the concept of negative peace, and we understand that peace is something which has to be created, and that requires restructuring the world. Reform should take place. Social justice should come about. Unity and mutual understanding should come about. Lots of things should happen. And that would create a pattern and form of social relationships among different groups, including among different countries. But it doesn't have to be just among countries. It can be among all different groups and so on. And that would be peace. Peace is something to be created. Because we normally have the concept of peace as negative peace, researchers have always found that people find children, for instance, lots of studies in Scandinavian countries, they find peace boring. They find war exciting. The reason is that negative conception of peace. If we move towards a positive conception of peace, people can become excited about peace. Baha'u'llah, in his writings, long time before the emergence of peace studies or Galtung and the like, in all his writings, he always talks of peace. But the word that he uses for peace, I want to emphasize, is a word which means multiple things at the same time. So it is peace, but it is also reform. It is development. It is betterment. It is reconstruction. I mean, it has many different meanings. So in order to show that a little bit, if you look a little bit at the handout that I have given you, in that handout you see that, I hope that it is visible, there are parts that I have made them in bold. So for instance, in the first one, Baha'u'llah says, all men have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. Now, what is the original of this? To carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, something that human beings are created for. Baha'u'llah is talking about human beings are created for this purpose, for carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. Now, the original is Jami az baraye islah alam khalq shudan. Everybody, all human beings are created for islah of the world. It's really the word islah, which is translated here in this very complex fashion, carrying forward an ever-advancing civilization. Now, the word islah, any Persian or any person who is familiar with Arabic immediately understands that it means reform, betterment, improvement, reconstruction. But it also, islah means peacemaking. It's from the word solh, and solh means peace. Islah means peacemaking. Even in the Quran, sometimes the word is used in that sense. In one verse of the Quran says that if two groups of the believers, namely of Muslims, they fight against each other, namely they are, the word is iqtatalu, namely they are engaging fight and murder of each other, you have to engage in islah. You should do islah among them. You should bring peace among them. Don't want to say the original Arabic because I might not remember all the words. Anyway, but at the same time, islah, any Iranian knows, and in Arabic, islah means reform, means to reconstruct. And in a technical fashion, islah also means that something in its origin is good. Then there is fasad or ifsad, namely it is being corrupted. That original good is corrupted. Now, islah means bringing it back, reforming it, but in the sense of going back to its original primordial purity and goodness. So it both means reconstruction, reform, development, bringing new things, but also it means going back to the original goodness of the world that God created. That the world that God has created is good. And we human beings, through those vain imaginings, through those lies that we ourselves have created, for instance, we created the idea that, color of race means that we should hate each other and kill each other and murder each other. Or whether a person is masculine or feminine should be the occasion for discrimination, for repression, for exploitation. These are all lies that we created. God didn't create any of these things. And anyway, so the rest of the statement also is very interesting. In the first statement, Baha'u'llah says that humans are created for peace. They are created for peace. This is the purpose of their existence. It's a totally different worldview than the idea that humans are created naturally as a being who is defined by aggression and war and so on. Baha'u'llah has a totally different idea. All men have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. The Almighty bears my witness. To act like the beasts of the field is unworthy of man. Those virtues that befit his dignity are forbearance, mercy, compassion, and loving kindness towards all peoples and kindreds of earth. This is definition of human being from the Baha'u'llah's point of view. In the second statement, the first line in English, you have to omit it. It shouldn't be there. The second statement says, the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. Now again, this word, the betterment, is اصلاح. اصلاح عالم از اعمال طیبه طاهره و اخلاق راضیه مرضیه بوده. Here that same word, اصلاح, is defined as the betterment of the world. The next statement, this is reference in varieties of ways to the biblical ideas that in the millenarian realization of the Savior, the means of murder and war would be transformed into the means of peace, instruments of agriculture, instruments that sustains life. In Isaiah and others, a very beautiful biblical concept. Now, Baha'u'llah sees himself now as the realization of that. And one way that he frequently mentions this is that he says, as selah be islah. We have to move from selah, which means weapons, means of war, to islah, means peacemaking. But at the same time, it means these other things. So this is one of them. Baha'u'llah says, these people, namely Baha'is, need no weapon of destruction, inasmuch as they have girded themselves to reconstruct the world. Here the word islah, as opposed to selah, is translated as reconstructing the world. Their hosts are the hosts of goodly deeds, and their arms of upright conduct, and their commander, the fear of God. All of these are related to the concept of victory that I'll talk about it. The victory is going to be realized through good deeds and through words. And that's why Baha'u'llah is constantly saying that realization of this peace, this reconstruction of the world, should take place through good deeds. The next one, as a result of this, namely as a result of the activities and teachings and education of Baha'u'llah, the community in Baghdad and other places, as a result of this, and by the grace of God, waywardness and folly were changed into piety and understanding, and weapons of war converted into instruments of peace. Again, it is the same word, selah be islah. Selah is converted into islah. But here the word islah is translated as instruments of peace. تا آنکه از فضل الهی غفلت و نادانی به بر و دانایی بدل گشت و سلاح به اصلاح. Finally, I'm not going to read the rest of them. In this very famous statement, Baha'u'llah is talking about the necessity of collective security for realization of peace. He says, it is their duty, namely the leaders of the world, it is their duty to convene an all-inclusive assembly, which either by themselves or their ministers will attend, and to enforce whatever measures are required to establish unity and concord amongst men. They must put away the weapons of war and turn to the instruments of universal reconstruction. Should one king rise up against another, all the other kings must arise to deter him. This is the concept of collective security that Baha'u'llah discusses in his writings. But again, the word, it says to turn from selah be islah, it's the same word. It's translated here in the put away the weapons of war, and turn to the instruments of universal reconstruction. These are just some of the examples of how this word Islah is translated by Shawqi Afandi, and of course, if you are familiar with Persian Arabic complexities of this term Islah, you already know this. Islah means peacemaking, but at the same time, peacemaking through reconstruction of the world, through betterment of the world, through improvement of life, ennobling the lives of the people, through justice, through creation of harmony, to eliminate all these arbitrary corruptions that humanity has created, and so on. In other words, the concept of peace for Baha'u'llah is, as Galtung defines it, an entirely positive concept of peace. Peace is not non-existence of war. Peace is an existential form of social relations that has to be constructed. And so peacemaking is constructing and reforming and developing a new world. Now, this was my sort of introduction, although the introduction took a lot of time, as usual. I want now to address the topic of the discussion today. And that's one way that Baha'u'llah is creating this peace in the world. And that's by his reconstruction of the concept of victory. This is extremely important. And one reason that it is important, not only it is because this is the central, really the central idea in all his writings throughout the 40 years that he wrote, 40 years of his ministry from 1852 to 1892, but also because this is the first experience of revelation of Baha'u'llah. When he was in the prison in Tehran, he received this first experience of revelation that he himself has recounted that. And so the exact statement of Baha'u'llah I have written here so that you have the exact statement, and we want to, the rest of discussion, very briefly look at this statement. This statement, at first when you read it, might look as a beautiful statement, but if you read it more carefully, I believe that the entire Baha'i culture, the entire teachings of Baha'u'llah in varieties of ways, in a condensed fashion, are already present here. And what I'm going to do briefly to explore this a little bit. So first I read the statement, but I come back to that all the time. So pay attention to that. One night in a dream, these exalted words were heard on every side. So Baha'u'llah is receiving this divine revelation. God is speaking to him. And what is that God is saying? God tells Baha'u'llah, verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Grieve thou not for that which has befallen thee. Neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. Ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name, wherewith God has revived the hearts of such as have recognized him. This statement is very complex. I mean, it has so many things. So, with your permission, we are going to look at a few of these aspects. The first thing, of course, the most important overall idea is that Baha'u'llah is categorically rejecting any idea of holy war, any idea of religious coercion, any idea of the use of violence, discrimination, repression in any form or shape as a method of promoting religious and spiritual ideas. So the only way that the cause of Baha'u'llah is going to be rendered victorious is through the being of Baha'u'llah, including his character and his deeds, and his pen. It is his pen and the realization of those ideas present in his writings, in his being, that is going to be the means of realization of victory and promoting of this new spiritual idea in the world. In other words, it is rejection of the concept of the sword. The sword is rejected, the sword is replaced by the word. This replacement of the sword by the word, so the pen is going to replace the sword. This becomes the heart of the Baha'i faith. Now, it is so interesting, and the first point that I want to mention is that this is a question of method. It's a question of method. What is the method that you are promoting Baha'i ideas and Baha'i faith? But in the revelation of Baha'u'llah, the method becomes the substantive message. And this is very crucial, and it is one of the distinguishing features of Baha'i concept of peace, Baha'i concept of social justice, Baha'i concept of changing the world from many other theories. Many other theories, they may defend social justice, they may call for peace, but many of them, not all of them, but many of them, in varieties of ways, they glorify the use of violence and hatred and justify belittling the others in order to realize that justice, in order to realize that peace. This has been the typical, one of the characteristics of Marxist theory. My specialty in social theory is Marxism. Has been that although it has some beautiful ideas, in addition to some non-beautiful ideas, but it has a lot of beautiful ideas. But those beautiful ideas, the realization of those beautiful ideas justifies, glorifies violence, glorifies belittling the others, glorifies hating the others. Now this other can be the bourgeoisie, this class of the exploiters, and so on, or it can be anything else. It can be even the other socialist groups, the hatred that all the Marxists, including Marx himself, had of the other socialist group who disagreed with him, and the way he himself talks about other socialists and the other people like young Hegelians and so on has been unfortunately exemplary for the Marxists. Namely, it just doesn't disagree. He has to dehumanize that other person. He has to ridicule that other person. And Marx was a very effective writer. For that reason, when he wants to do this, is very successful. But that is in contradiction to that set of beautiful ideas when he talks about some of the lofty ideas of social justice and so on. But he doesn't know, and the Marxists following him, vast majority of them, did not understand that. Everywhere in the world, in the name of justice, in the name of fighting against injustice, we learn to hate others. And this is what is completely rejected by the Baha'i faith. So it is the first experience of revelation that the method of promoting these ideas of Baha'u'llah, which is peace and unity ultimately, the method should be also through love and unity. The method is through voluntary acceptance. The method is through changing the hearts with love, with communication, not with hatred, not with dehumanization, not with war, not with prejudice and the like. This is a very important challenge. And it gives a completely new sense of how we have to create peace, how we have to work for social justice and the like in the world. The other little thing that I want to say is that this statement of Baha'u'llah, in a sense, is a reflection of his philosophical, metaphysical view. You might be surprised that this statement seems to have nothing to do with philosophy or metaphysics of the world. But if you pay attention, Baha'u'llah is talking about three realms of reality. First is God. At first, God is speaking. Verily we shall render thee victorious. God is speaking. So first we have God. The second level is the level of the prophets of God, manifestations of God. We shall render thee, namely Baha'u'llah. So first is God. Then there is the realm of the prophets of God, manifestations of God. And after God says to Baha'u'llah that we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen, grieve thou not, and so on, then he says, ere long will God raise up the treasures of the earth, men who will aid thee through thyself and through thy name. Now we are talking about the third level of reality, namely the created beings, human beings. These human beings who become the treasures of the earth, and they are going to rise up and render victorious the cause of Baha'u'llah. The interesting thing is that all the three layers of reality, God, the realm of prophets or manifestations, and then the realm of the created realm and humanity, they all are ultimately defined in terms of something common. They are all engaged in this act of victory, or rendering the cause of God victorious. Pay attention to this statement. First, God is engaged in rendering victory. Verily we shall render thee victorious. God is engaged in the act of assisting, of making victorious, right? Right? But then how God renders victorious Baha'u'llah and the cause of Baha'u'llah? God does that through, by thyself and by thy pen. It is through the activities of Baha'u'llah, through the pen of Baha'u'llah, through the being and mannerism and character and charisma and loving characteristics of Baha'u'llah that this rendering the cause of God is going to take place. So God is engaged in Nusrat. I use the original word becomes easier than saying render victorious and so on. God is engaged in Nusrat. Baha'u'llah and the prophets are engaged in Nusrat, and then human beings are engaged in Nusrat. Ere long shall God raise the treasures of the earth. And these are the people who are going to render the cause of God victorious. But this rendering the cause of God victorious takes place through love, through word, through purification of heart, not through violence. And in a sense, it's a new definition of human beings. At the same time of prophets of God and religion, and also God. God has always been in varieties of sacred traditions, including Christianity. God has been defined as love. God is love. And this is reflected in the new concept of this rendering the cause of God victorious. But the realm of the prophets of God and the realm of humanity is also defined in this way. You see that humanity now becomes the mirror of God. The idea that humans are reflections of God, are mirrors of God, is already present here. God engages in rendering victorious Baha'u'llah, but then God is raising human beings who will render victorious the spiritual culture that Baha'u'llah has brought. Human being becomes participating partners, reflections of God. That means the metaphysics in which everything becomes spiritual. The created realm, instead of being just a set of dead material, solid entities, it becomes reflections of God. I don't have the time to discuss these things, but to simplify it, in the history of philosophy, you can say that the Greeks, lots of them, considered the world as a substance, something which is rational and rationally can be approached. And then in medieval ages, the world was defined not as substance, but as creature of God, as something created by God, which can be understood through textual and traditional ways. And then in the modern world, increasingly, we went through a new conception that the world was understood as a set of material things, matter and energy. And the sensory, empirical way of understanding this world became dominant. From rational, the Greek rational things, for instance, we went to the more textual, traditional method, and then to more empirical ways, different ways of looking at these things. In the writings of Baha'u'llah, all of this changes. And it is very interesting that in varieties of his writings, with regard to the natural world, Baha'u'llah defines the natural world as the realm of the wonder, as the realm of mystery, as the realm of miracle. And for that reason, he believes that reason, rational way, and empirical way has to come together. One without the other cannot understand nature. For nature to be understood, both of them should come together. The Greeks could not understand nature because they just speculated. They just used reason. They didn't use empirical methods, observation, and so on. But from the point of view of Baha'u'llah, everything in the world is a miraculous event. And that's why reason by itself can never understand anything. Reason has to be accompanied by observation, by experience, to be able to understand it. He gives the example of the sun, that if one has never seen the sun, has never experienced the sun in any way or shape, now if you give all these rational, philosophical explanations of that and so on, the person can never believe that such a thing is possible. Or he gives the example in another of his writing, the seed of, for instance, the varieties of trees with fruits and so on, big trees with fruits and so on, that if we have not observed this through experience, if somebody just rationally would have come and told us that in this little seed, all these leaves and fruits and all these things and powers are present, we would never have believed that. The only way that we can understand it, and this is the way science works, is that reason and experience come together. And once we see that, now reason can become valid means of understanding it. The problem, however, is that when we use just a materialistic framework, through experience, we see things, and then we become habituated to that. It becomes ordinary for us, and we forget the fact that these laws of nature are miraculous things. That's why we couldn't just understand it through reason. We had to see it. Because it is wonderful. Everything in nature is wonderful. Everything is a miraculous thing. But the problem of humanity is that we get habituated to all these miracles around us. I remember where I started to do a little farming in our home when we were in Minnesota. I would always was mesmerized. I put a little seed there, and a few days after that, you have a life coming out. Imagine that you are just born and you have intellect, but you are just born. You have no experience of reality, and you see something like that. How amazed you become. Everything in life is filled with miracles. Everything is miracle and miraculous. In other words, everything is a testimony to the presence of God. Everything is a testimony to the spiritual nature of reality. That's the view that Baha'u'llah has. And so everything is neither matter nor creature of God, nor substance. I mean, all of them are there. But this creature of God is a mirror of God, is a reflection of God. It's not that it's a dead creature of God. It's a mirror of God. It's a reflection of God that you see here also in this statement. And that's why all beings, from the point of view of Baha'u'llah, are in motion. They are unveiling the truth, which is ultimately God. They are all symbols. They are all dancing. They are all exciting. They are all speaking. The world is not a dead, static thing. I want you to pay attention to the statement of Baha'u'llah that in the future, God shall raise treasures of the world, treasures of the earth. It is so interesting that the mystical ways that in Baha'i writings, which is also existing in the Islamic mysticism, that God is always defined as the hidden treasure. That famous tradition, I was a hidden treasure, I love to be known, therefore I created the world in order to be known, which Baha'u'llah in hidden words reverses that. The order becomes completely reversed, which is another expression of the fact that at that level of a spiritual cosmic reality, the first and the last are one and the same. Duality disappears. So the orders, what is prior and what is subsequent and so on, they are interchangeable. You go beyond the realm of limitations and so on. I have to refer to that. I can't elaborate because we have no time. Anyway, now God is defined as the treasure, hidden treasure, who has to be discovered. And here human beings are now defined in that first experience of the revelation of God. God shall raise the treasures of the earth. Kunuzul ars is the same word. Kuntu kanzan makhfiyan. Kanz is treasure. And now human beings are kunuz, treasures, the same word, plural. You see that again, human being becomes the image of God. The beautiful statement in the beginning of Torah that God said, let's create human beings in our own like an image. That is such a beautiful statement. The world did not need really any other spiritual guidance if humanity ever understood that. But we never understood that statement. Never. And so God and sacred spiritual traditions and so on has to tell us that same truth in new ways, in novel ways again and again in human history. The other thing about this treasure, Baha'u'llah in his writings frequently defines human beings as a mine, as a treasure. He uses all these words. And that's very crucial for his philosophy and for his social and political ideas. Human beings are this treasure. Human being is this hidden treasure. We have this material aspect, but this material aspect is hiding our own truth. Those gems, those jewels, the spiritual qualities, the spiritual perfections, which define our reality, our spiritual reality. We are that. But that is hidden in us. We are a mind that all these jewels are present within us. The task of the life is to discover this and unveil these gems, these precious things. Movement from our material life, a life of jungle in which we define ourselves purely in terms of our material, physical characteristics, and therefore we hate each other and we kill each other and we think that we should follow the law of struggle for existence. We have to move from that, discover our spiritual essence and reality. And therefore, we should strive to be born as a human being from the realm of struggle for existence to move towards the logic of a spirit. And this statement of Baha'u'llah, this first experience of revelation of Baha'u'llah, is a turning point in human history for realization of just that. Namely, the concept of victory is being transformed so that for the first time, as a cultural reality, as a form of social order, human beings are born as spiritual beings. That we won't be now wolves and beasts of the field, as he said in one of his statements that is in this same handout. But that we would emerge, we would discover our spiritual truth as reflection of God, and discover that everybody is reflection of God, and discover that we are all one and the same. And therefore we discover that we are all beautiful, we are all sacred. And the new social order that is going to be created, which in the future discussions I'll address those things, becomes a reflection of this a new definition of human beings. Before I finish, and when I say I finish, I'm excluding lots of different discussions about this. I want to pay attention to 2 or 3 other major points, if you are still with me. Are you? Yes. The first one is concealed, what is being said. So God tells Baha'u'llah, verily we shall render thee victorious by thyself and by thy pen. Then he says, grieve thou not. Don't be sad. Grieve thou not. For that which has befallen thee. This is the time that Baha'u'llah, innocently because of his beliefs, he is put into the prison, and it is the time of genocide and massacre of the Babis in Iran. One of the darkest moments of the history of Iran is that same time, 1852, state and clerics unified different segments of Iranian society for distributing Babis to all these different groups, so that everybody engages in killing them. It's not just the state would kill them. It's not just the clergy would kill them. Darul Funun, which was the first Iranian university, the professors, the president of that, the students, had to kill a Babi who was affiliated with this. By the way, the president is the author of Rawzat al-Safa. Hidayat. Hidayat, the author of one of the 2 most important works, official works of history of Qajar. One is Nasakh al-Tawarikh, written by Seper. The other one is written by Hidayat, Rawzat al-Safa. He was the president of Darul Funun. And all of these people are very famous in Iran, including the books of history that they have written. Although whenever there is discussion of the Babis, and both books extensively discuss the Babi movement, the Bab, and so on, extensively. They all write it around, they finished their writing around 1857. So it's 5 years after this event is taking place. The concept of university, unfortunately, in the history of Iran begins in this way. That's why I said it's one of the darkest moments in the history of Iran. And our historians, the people who write history of Iran, the people who write history of the Babism and Babi movement and the Bab also, are people who, by their own hands, they have killed Babi in 1852. So it's a very difficult time. And so God is telling Baha'u'llah, grieve thou not for that which has befallen thee, neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. Now, of course, implications of this is very broad. Don't be afraid of experience of persecution. That's a theme which runs in the writings of Baha'u'llah from now on. And so he's constantly teaching the Baha'is, if you are being even killed, if you are being imprisoned, your property confiscated, they harm you in varieties of ways, you should not be disturbed, you should trust in God, which means you should never engage in violence in response. You should do the exact opposite. And that's expression of this principle here. But I wanted, in addition to these things, to say that this is also saying something else. This statement of Baha'u'llah, namely God telling to Baha'u'llah, neither be thou afraid, for thou art in safety. This is the exact statement, according to the Quran, that God spoke to Moses. La takhaf, innaka min al-aminin. Don't be afraid, thou art in safety. This exact statement, it's exactly the same statement, is mentioned here. Namely, in this statement, Baha'u'llah becomes Moses. God is saying to Baha'u'llah the same thing that God said to Moses. One of the central principles of the Baha'i faith, which is reflected in this concept of unity, victory, is that all prophets of God are one and the same. All humanity are one and the same. And of course, there is one God. In the story of Moses, as discussed in the Quran, which is very similar to the way it is in Torah, when Moses goes to the burning bush, and there are conversations between God and Moses, God gives Moses two proofs to prove that he has a message from God. One is that he gives him this staff that he had, creates new powers in this staff of Moses. And the other was in his hand, that becomes a shining hand. When discussing the question of staff as one of the evidences, namely what rendered victorious the cause of Moses, becomes these two, staff and his hand. God tells Moses, throw your staff on the ground. So he obeys and he throws his staff on the ground. And then it turns into a gigantic snake. According to the Quran, Moses, when he sees this, he's afraid. And so he goes back. He steps back. At this time, God tells Moses, come forth. And then exactly this statement, La takhaf, innaka min al-aminin. Be not afraid, for thou art in safety. That exact statement, without any change, is mentioned now here. But you see the implications. The immediate implication is that Baha'u'llah, Moses, Jesus, Zoroaster, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, all are one and the same. There is no difference among them. Their bodies are different, their human characteristics are different, but their truth is one and the same. Which becomes the peace among religions. And without that peace, real peace, that positive peace is impossible in the world. But the other implications of this is that the staff of Moses now becomes the pen of Baha'u'llah. And the hand of Moses becomes the being of Baha'u'llah. The difference is that now the evidence to prove Baha'u'llah's cause becomes his words. The movement of his pen is no longer the miraculous natural events, Because for Baha'u'llah, every law of nature itself is miracle. Miracle is not violation of the laws of nature. Laws of nature are embodiment of miracle all the time. And that the time has come, humanity has entered a new stage of development, that humanity now can emerge as a spiritual being, as consciousness. And that means the centrality now of word. Concept of religion, of spiritual values now take the form of the word, ideas. The heart should be transformed. And so the pen of Baha'u'llah becomes the replacement of the staff of Moses. And for Baha'u'llah, of course, prophets of God can do strange miracles. But the real miracle for Baha'u'llah are the words of God. And prophets of God don't go and do miracles just because people want them to do. That's one of the problems in religious consciousness. The worst form that it took, perhaps, is in the history of Islam. Because the Quran constantly, is talking about this fact that the Arabs constantly come to Prophet Muhammad and they say that if you are truthful and God has sent you and you are from God, then do this miracle for us. If not that, then do another miracle for us. In one statement, they give 6 options to Prophet Muhammad. They do one of these. All the time and without exception. There's no exception. The answer that God gives in the Quran is that Muhammad, tell them that I'm just a human being. The only difference is that I received divine revelation, and I received divine ideas, words. Quran is the supreme miracle of Islam. Despite the fact that the Quran categorically, all the time, is rejecting this concept of miracle as irrelevant to the truth claim of Prophet Muhammad, Quran constantly, in a very beautiful fashion, says that the way to understand God is to look at, for instance, the change of the night to the day. Look at the trees. So constantly Quran talks about the laws of nature and makes it a proof of the presence of God in the world. It's the same viewpoint that I mentioned previously about Baha'u'llah's vision. That could have been compatible with a very rational, scientific approach to nature. But unfortunately, the clerics of Islam from that very beginning completely forgot about the Quran and created this universe of magic, of superstition, and the idea that they created of Prophet Muhammad and for the Shia Islam of the Imams is that they were constantly doing this prophet or that, this miracle or that miracle, this miracle or that miracle. So this magical consciousness, and then in Sufism also that becomes this huge part of mystical consciousness. All this, every Sufi is making all these miracles and so on. Total distortion and degradation of the Islamic culture. And so instead of moving, and at first it was a cradle of civilization, science, philosophy, and so on, but soon it was replaced by the opposite trend. I'll finish this discussion by saying one last little thing. In this statement, Baha'u'llah is asking people to render the cause of God victorious. And it is through good deeds that we should do. We should become mirrors of Baha'u'llah's character and Baha'u'llah's charisma, but also through pen, through words, sharing the words of Baha'u'llah and message of Baha'u'llah. And this is central for Baha'i consciousness, and it has a double character. The first character, so far I discussed it and you saw that, namely, it rejects the idea that we have the right to use violence in order to make people members of our religious group, imposing our ideas by force and coercion on others. Of course, this is opposite to the concept of freedom. For animals, you can do that, but for human being, to emerge as a human being, as consciousness, as image of God, this is no longer acceptable. And so this reconstruction of the concept of victory is affirmation of the sanctity of human freedom and freedom of conscience. But it has also a second character, which is usually overlooked. The second character is that Baha'u'llah wants his followers to go and proclaim the message of Baha'u'llah to the world. And this, in the present culture, actually from modernity now to post-modernity, is defined as something uncivilized. Namely, to talk about religion, your religion, to others. And they have all these negative words and labels and so on for this. You are uncivilized if you talk about religion. But the reason, although it pretends that this is a civilized act, in reality, both in the form of postmodernist version of that and in the modernist version of that, which I won't elaborate, it is really rejection of human dignity and rejection of human freedom. In other words, the modern world rejects the idea that by sword you go and coercion, you force your religion on the other, but it accepts and celebrates the idea of imitation of religion from your society, from your fathers, from your family and the like. The idea that religion becomes a question of inheritance or tradition, not a matter of consciousness, not a matter of choice. And that's why it becomes, either because of the hostility of modernity to religion, which religion becomes something irrational, and so contrary to the realm of rationality, which should be publicly discussed and debated, the realm of religion becomes this irrational realm. It should not be publicly discussed. Anybody who discusses it publicly is uncivilized, which means that the only way that religion should rule in terms of culture is that people, without investigation, rational investigation of that, without communication with others, they have to follow the pattern of their tradition. Their fathers, their mothers have been in this way, the society has been in this way, so they follow. From the point of view of Baha'u'llah, realization of humans as a spiritual being, human freedom, realization of human freedom also requires not only rejection of religious coercion, but also rejection of the logic of imitation or tradition with regard to the concept of religion. The concept of religion also should be a matter of choice. And this choice is not just lack of coercion, that the sword would not be there, but emergence of a new culture in which people actively engage in independent investigation of a spiritual truth. That's why the message of Baha'u'llah in that first statement is calling and redefining this concept of rendering the cause of God victorious. We normally become so influenced by the social, cultural traditions, conventions around us that we forget to think for ourselves. And so this aspect of the question also, the modern materialistic culture is presenting its intolerance of religion in the form of appearance of civilization and humanity and things like that. But in fact, it is the exact opposite. That's why Baha'u'llah replaces the sword with the word but he's also replacing unconscious imitation, following of the others, also by this active character of human being as consciousness, as one who can and who should independently try to think for himself, for herself, and make a choice. And of course, in my future discussions, you'll see that this becomes the foundation of Baha'u'llah's concept of political democracy. A culture that learned and taught people that they all should think for themselves and not follow anybody else, that culture makes possibility of democracy real. In the country that I am from, in Iran, and more or less the entire Middle East, this is still the main challenge. We have been for more than 100 years trying to realize political democracy without realizing this spiritual, cultural democracy, namely the habit, the idea, and self-confidence that we should think for ourselves. We should not follow the clerics. And as long as that has not happened, political democracy is impossible. You'll see later on in the social political implications of these issues and so on. Thank you so much for staying.